Today we are going to make an old-fashioned sandwich bread. This bread has an ingredient in it that I don't think that you're going to find in many modern day recipes. If you live in the South, this may be a common ingredient for you. So I have made this recipe for over 25 years. And through the years, my family insists that I always make homemade dinner rolls for all of the holidays, and I'm using the same recipe. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you the many things that you can take the same bread recipe and turn this into multiple different things. If you follow along with me, I'm sure that you too can make this sandwich loaf. And I'm sure that when your family tries this, they are going to love it and it will bring smiles to their face. We're going to head on over to the stove. Okay, we're going to begin by turning on the stove on medium-high. And then our first ingredient is milk. And many recipes do not call for milk, but milk will lengthen the shelf life of your bread, and it also makes your bread softer. So I recommend it, and I also recommend using whole milk. And then the second thing that I'm going to put in here is the not so common ingredient, and that is the bacon grease. So I know many of you are instantly thinking that just sounds disgusting, but in reality it adds such a depth of flavor, and it is actually makes it so much better. I just challenge you to just give it a try, because I think that you will find it to be an amazing ingredient that you won't turn away from. I know years ago I used lard and I love that as well, but the bacon grease adds a depth of flavor that I no longer want to go back to using just the lard. So let's go ahead and that. And the ingredients you will find in the recipe below. And the next ingredient that I'm going to add is sugar. I'm using organic cane sugar, but you can use honey, you can use other things, so just do what works best for you. So the next ingredient that I'm going to use is Redmond's Real Salt. Redmond's Real Salt is a healthier alternative to a lot of the salt that's out there, and it has a lot better flavor. I'm going to go with that now. All right, so we're basically just going to make sure that our oil dissolves, and I suppose if you're using a regular oil, which you can use like an avocado oil or olive oil. Them are the ones that I recommend, because the problem with a lot of the seed oils is they're inflammatory and there's just a lot of bad things in them. So I would recommend using avocado oil or something like that. So the idea here is just to get it warmed up and melt any oil or fats that you put in here, whatever ones you decide. So I'm going to go turn this off. And I take this to our garage, because our garage is a lot cooler. Now that our milk mixture has cooled, we can mix together the yeast mixture. There are multiple ways that you can mix your bread. You could do it by hand. You could start it with a Danish dough whisk, and then you could transfer over to using your hands to mix it. Or you can use a stand mixer. This is a Bosch mixer, which works really well for stiffer doughs, or there's also the KitchenAid, so you can mix it however you like. So I'm going to add some lukewarm water to this basin. Make sure that your water is not too warm. When you're first learning, I would recommend getting out a thermometer and testing the temperature until you get used to it, because the last thing you want to do is kill your yeast. And then we're going to add the yeast. Now there's different kinds of yeast. The one I'm using is the active dry yeast. There's also an instant yeast. The fermentation is a lot faster with the instant yeast, and I feel like you lose a little bit of flavor with that. You probably wouldn't notice it, but I have always used the active dry yeast. As far as storing the active dry yeast, I put it in the freezer. So I store it in this jar so that I have easy access each time that I need it. There's also an option for yeast packets. So it's whatever works best for you, but I always use the bulk because it's cheaper, and you can just use a tablespoon per packet. So we're gonna take our yeast and add it to the water. And then we're gonna put our sugar in there. This will help to activate the yeast. So I'm gonna mix this. And then once our yeast mixture gets completely dissolved, we can turn it off. And then we'll let it sit here. I like to cover it. And we'll let it get nice and foamy. We'll know that it's activated. If it does not get foamy on top, then your yeast is probably dead. So you want to make sure that it's foamy or get a different yeast. Now that our yeast mixture is nice and foamy, we can go ahead and add our milk mixture to this. So we'll again want to test the milk mixture to make sure it's cooled off enough, again between 100 and 110 degrees. So if that's cooled off good enough, we can go ahead and add that to our yeast mixture. And then I always add a little bit of vitamin C powder, just a pinch for these 2 loaves, just to enhance the dough, make it rise a little bit better. It helps with fermentation, and it also prolongs the life of your bread after it's baked. So I'm going to go ahead and add the vitamin C powder. The vitamin C powder is something you can pick up at most places. The vitamin C powder is optional. It's up to you if you want to add it. Most people do not, but I always add it to mine. We will go ahead and mix those ingredients together. The next step will be to add the bread flour to the mixture, and this is the kind of bread flour I use. Bread flour has 2% more protein than what all-purpose flour has, and so there's a little more gluten development with the bread flour, and it allows the dough to stretch and trap air bubbles during the fermentation, and it results in a lighter, a chewier, and a better rising bread. So I highly recommend using bread flour for this bread. So I'm going to start by adding just a few cups of flour to this mixture. And then I'll go ahead and mix that up. At this point, I'm just gonna let it sit here for about 5 minutes to absorb that flour. Most people don't do this step, but I feel like it helps soften the dough up a little bit more, and it just seems to work better for me. So it's up to you if you wanna do this step. So at this point, we're gonna add the rest of our flour, but we'll only add it in 1/2 cup increments, just so we don't add too much flour, because it depends on the humidity in the house. It depends on a lot of things. So you may not use all the flour that it says in the recipe. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add 1/2 cup at a time. And then I'm just gonna watch for it to get tacky, but not too sticky. And it will pull away from the side of the bowl. Mine already has, so just keep a close eye on it so you don't add too much flour. So I'm gonna go ahead and add 1/2 cup of flour. and then I'll mix that in. You will mix your dough for about 8 to 10 minutes with a stand mixer, but if you're mixing it by hand, it takes about 25 minutes. Okay, so I've mixed my dough for about 8 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and pull out a piece of dough, and then I will do the window pane test, and that's where you kind of stretch out a piece of dough and you stretch it out so that you can see through it, but it's not pulling apart and breaking. As you can see, this dough is not sticking to my hands. It's a little bit tacky. Now that I have my dough ready to rise, I'm going to go ahead and remove it from this bowl into this one because this has a high center in it. I just prefer letting it rise in this bowl. So I'm going to remove my paddle. And then I'll get the dough out. You're going to want a bowl that is at least twice the size of your dough. I'm going to give this a little tension, make it into a ball. And then you'll want to oil or grease your dough. So I'm getting out the bacon grease once again, but you can use regular oil for this if you want to. And then I'll go ahead and grease it up nicely, and this keeps it from drying out during the rise. You can grease the inside of the bowl. It'll just help keep the dough from sticking to the sides of the bowl. So I'm going to let this rise. It'll be about an hour. It depends on how warm your house is though. It's nice when your home is about 70 degrees. It rises a lot better. If it's cooler, it may take longer. You can expedite this process by putting it in the oven with the light on. You can put it on a heating mat, but you have to be careful you don't get it too warm. But the problem with expediting this process is that this stage is called the fermentation stage. And if you rush the fermentation stage, you lose a lot of flavor. Yeast begins to grow by feeding on the sugar and the starches that are in the dough. And it releases small bubbles of carbon dioxide gas. This gas is trapped inside of the dough, and the dough then begins to expand. So that is what's happening during the fermentation process. I'm going to let this sit here for about an hour. At 70 degrees, it should take about an hour, but you're going to want to keep a close eye on it. In fact, if you are new and you want to be sure, you could put this in a clear bowl with a large rubber band that shows where the height is whenever you set it to start rising, and then you'll watch when it gets double. It's at that point where you push it down. Okay, I'm going to cover the bread and let it rise. Okay, so at this point we can put a knuckle in here, indent it, and if it comes back slowly or does not come back at all, we know it's ready to push down. And so now I'm going to push it down. Some people say to push all of the air out of it, and then others say not to. I don't usually push all the air out of it. So I just kind of do it about like that. And then I will divide this in half. So you can use a cutter like this to, I just realized I have this. So we're going to grease our pans next, and you can use whatever kind of oil you want. I'm going to use avocado oil. I use one of these. I can't say that it works the best because it has a tendency to not work at all, but I can usually at least get some out of it. So if you have any suggestions, leave a comment below. So as you see, it kind of drizzles out, but it works. So we're gonna go ahead and grease our pan. So these are a cast iron pan, and they work very good. I feel that they have an even heat compared to a regular pan, but if I'm sure most of you just have regular pans, and that works too. Don't let it slow you down to wait until you have a cast iron pan to do this, because you can do it with pretty much any kind of pan. So make sure that it's oiled really good. Now that we have our dough cut into 2 loaves, we're gonna go ahead and shape it. There's different ways that people do this. My way is non-traditional, and that is I just stretch the bread on the top like this so that it develops tension, and then I just kind of tuck it in on the bottom, and I make a loaf like that. It just saves time, and it always works out. The other method would be to roll it out, and so I will show you that as well. So typically the one that I shaped myself the way I normally do, I'm just going to put that in there, and I'm going to push down on it a little bit, and then I'll just set it aside to let it rise. And then the other one, I will show you how they typically do this. So they typically put it on the counter. So you're going to put this in like a rectangular shape, and you can use your fingers to kind of press it out. And then you're going to roll it up. And then most people, they squeeze these ends together, and then they tuck in the very end of it like that. And then they put it in here. I'm sure I probably didn't do that justice because, like I say, I always do it the other way. It just saves messing the counter up. I can just pull it right out of the bowl and shape it. So that's how I normally do it. And then again, we are going to want to grease the top of these. So I'm going to grab the bacon grease once again. So I'm going to take the bacon grease and grease the top of these. Grab this one. Got that one oiled. There. Now I'm going to put the towel back on it and let it rise again. And we'll probably see it back here in about an hour. The bread is almost doubled, so I'm going to preheat the oven to 350. Our bread is ready to go in the oven. I have preheated the oven, so we're going to take this bread and get it in the oven at 350 degrees. We're going to set a timer for 30 to 35 minutes. We'll keep an eye on it, and whenever it gets close to being done, we will take an internal temperature of the bread, and we want the temperature to be between 190 degrees and 200 degrees to make sure that the inside of it's done. In the past, I have gassed at it, and sometimes it's done and sometimes it's not. So I always use an internal temperature, but I'll leave that up to you. But if you're new at it, I would definitely check the inside temperature of the bread. All right, so it looks like they're done. I'm gonna check the temperature and make sure that it's up to, yep, they are ready. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these out of the oven. And we'll get them over on the counter. The bread is out of the oven and it smells amazing. We will grab our butter. We're gonna butter our bread. And the purpose for buttering it is to make it nice and soft on the top so it doesn't get hard. For artisan, you might want that, but not with homemade bread. Doesn't that look beautiful? Now we're going to turn the bread out. So now we have these over here on the rack to cool. And we're going to let them cool for about an hour. I know it's tempting to cut into them before that, but if you cut into them right away, it could have like a doughy, dense taste to it. The other thing is that when you cut into a loaf of bread, it lets the moisture escape and your bread will not be as fresh tasting later on. It will dry the loaf out. So just be patient and wait for about an hour and then we're going to cut into it. Okay, so this is the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to cut the bread. So I'm gonna set this one aside. And we'll go ahead and cut into this one. And you'll want to use a serrated knife to cut it. Any kind of a bread knife would work. You can also use an electric knife if you have one of them. I find for the homemade style bread, a knife like this works just fine. We'll go ahead. Cut another one. Take a look at that. I'm gonna butter one. Let's give this a try. Yep, very good. So you can use the same recipe to make fried bread, cinnamon rolls, stromboli, pizza crust. The list goes on and on about the things that you can make with this, and it's all amazing. And of course you can make dinner rolls also. So I plan to show you in a future video how to make several of them recipes also. Thank you for watching my very first YouTube video. Follow along and watch me as I learn to film, edit, and create more content just like this. If you hit the subscribe button, as well as a notification, then you will be notified whenever I put out a new video. My goal is to put out a video once a week. You can plan to see content related to cooking, preserving, organizing, cleaning, as well as gardening. Feel free to post things that you'd like to see in the comment section below. Please join the Country Legacy Facebook page where you can post pictures of the homemade bread that you make. I really look forward to hearing about the bread that you make and how much your family will also enjoy it. Until next time, have a blessed day.